as I said at the beginning, we have 40 years of experience now collectively since those first retreats out at Spencer, Massachusetts, with practicing this practice and working little small groups of people, some just joining the practice, some in it for decades, but working with this practice so powerfully built on the cloud of unknowing and its own perception that this work of contemplation, as he calls it, is leading us into a new kind of consciousness, a new kind of state of being, and a whole new hard wiring of perception. We have people that have been working with this, that have been sitting down 20 minutes twice a day for 40 years. What does that amount to? And slowly patterning in these new capacities, these new synapses into our brain and into our brain-heart connection. So this has all been going on beneath the surface. But I would say that the maps that we have mostly been using in contemplative outreach to compute and make sense of what we're doing with the journey are pitched to the higher active, lower contemplative level. The whole brilliant teaching that I'm sure all of you have grown up on the human condition and the divine therapy, which is powerful teaching and segues right into the recovery movement that gives you wonderful tools for recognizing the actings out and the invasions and tyranny of your false self and moving in the direction of something that gets called true self. But so often, and implicit in the language around here, is the idea, the implication, that the true self is simply a non-neurotic, cleaned-up version of the false self. And that, my friends, is sadly not true. Whatever we mean by the true self, it does not exist at the same level as the false self. The true self is a function of the higher contemplative, not of the lower contemplative. And the true self really begins, and this is so clear when you look at the mystical language, it begins with witnessing presence, with that unboundaried, commingled, flowing sense of interpenetrated selfhood, which is dimensionless and boundaryless because it's moving. It doesn't stop. It's not a thing. It doesn't have qualities. It doesn't have a story. And so what we've been doing is essentially we've been training in a non-dual practice, but trying to unpack it in still dualistic language and categories. And I think that a number of people in contemplative outreach, particularly the longer-standing practitioners, have really kind of hit the ceiling on this. We've gone as far as we can go with the journey, the human journey, the divine therapy at that level. And I think the challenge for the next generation of centering prayer teaching is to create the complementary next step, which begins to take people conceptually on the journey into non-dual selfhood by more attention and more training to such things that cause a lot of people hard times here in the way we unpack things from our traditional religious upbringing. But ideas like witnessing self, non-identification, attention, and embodiment. And I think to begin to build a teaching that works with these pieces in a more consistent and systematic way and practical way to lead people to the next step in the journey. The first step in the journey clearly and patently is to heal, to recognize, heal, and move along with the false self, to become the highest possible finite self we can be. But that's maybe halfway there. The next step then is to step into unboundaried selfhood and its natural propensity and brilliance of forming organic, higher collectivities. One of my favorite sayings is from a Sufi friend of mine who says, 2 stones can't occupy the same space, but 2 fragrances can. And finite selfhoods are 2 stones trying to occupy the same space. They're too boundaried, they're too reified. But as we learn to flow, as to live in these unboundaried collective, interpenetrating fragrances, which are our true selves, we get further as a collective body of humanity in forming that one body of Christ in which we are all, in our own ways, members. So I think this is work that desperately needs to be done on our planet. And I'm challenging the next generation of practitioners to say, you've already got the wiring programmed into you. You're working with this. You've laid down the tracks without even knowing it that allow you to move from a somewhat more heavy and urgent and boundaried sense of selfhood into something so much lighter. We just have to show you how to do it. Say, hey, the shoes are already on your feet. Click your heels together and fly home to Kansas. Anyway, that would be just a start of what I would bring to you. There's more of it in the book. You'll find the chapter and verses of some of the things I've just dropped on you, asking your permission for a willing suspension of disbelief until you can read them and see how I got there. But hopefully this will be the start of continuing conversations when you've all got the book in hand and can come back at me with questions. Meanwhile, I would say as we come into the last of it, that some of this is just so cool and so practical. Am I cheating by looking at the time before 20 minutes? Let's get real here. Forget non-dual consciousness. No, you're not cheating. I do it all the time. The mistake here is in thinking, once again, in thinking that the purpose in centering prayer is to create these profound states of rapturous silence in which cognitive thinking is dispensed. It doesn't work that way. You know, in any period of centering prayer, you're typically kind of in the sine wave, and there's sometimes in which you're in periods of deeper recollection, and there's sometimes then you come up to the surface because thoughts are jostling around. And if you're looking at your watch and saying, then that's fine. No harm's done. I guarantee you won't be looking at your watch when you're in deeper absorption. If you sit more than 20 minutes, no harm is done. If you come up during those periods of coming up, which are a part of the natural rhythm of it, and looking at it, that's perfectly fine. Simply be comfortable. Simply follow your own natural rhythm. And please realize that people have all different kinds of wirings when they start the prayer. And people that are the kind of Vata Ayurveda types wired are going to have a harder time, you know, falling into those deep states of absorption. That's okay. The prayer is not about deep states of absorption. It's about letting go. Wherever you are. So just be careful about that. There was another question that was kind of interesting on the same way that talked about what's preparation for centering prayer. Any ideas for that? Let's see. I can't see where that question was, but it was a good enough one that it follows. I like to say, crazy that I am, that I love every once in a while to do centering prayer with no preparation at all, because so many of us like to create these long, beautiful vestibules, you know, where we calm ourselves down. You know, you kind of don't have coffee before you do it. You chant, you put on beautiful music. But you see, once again, what you're trying to do, whether implicitly or not, you're identifying a good period of prayer with quiet and bliss. And I want to erase that programming. A good period of prayer is when you sit down and do the work. You catch yourself thinking, you let the thought go. And as many of you know, that sometimes the most powerful healing work is done in centering prayer when you're in the midst of that unloading of the unconsciousness, when there's a lot of struggle, there's a lot of turbulence, and all you can do is hang on for all you're worth to not run screaming from your meditation mat. Good work is done there, profound letting go. So I think both I and Thomas would emphasize over and over and over again, don't judge the quality of the prayer period by your subjective experience of what's going on, and don't try to aim to create a so-called preferred state. It just gets in the way. Wherever you are, show up. And trust it. Offer it as the work of centering prayer. And don't ever get tempted into, I can't do my centering prayer today because I don't have 20 minutes to prepare myself for centering prayer. Plop yourself down. Let yourself be an altar in all your turmoil and chaos, offering to God the letting go. That's where the work is done. The problem of falling asleep during centering prayer. Well, at a superficial level, William Menninger loves to say, "What's wrong with falling asleep?" That sometimes the body just needs to sleep, and centering prayer does work in a bandwidth, which is closer to sleep than most meditation practices. That's one of the things that's daring and innovative about it. When you're working with more classic mantric practice, you're giving the mind a certain amount of effort, coming back to the mantra, coming back to the word, that keeps it just above that threshold of sleep. In centering prayer, we relax that, and sometimes you do fall asleep. I would say that basically, don't be afraid of it if it happens. Try to meditate in periods of time when you're not already sleepy. Look for your most alert time to do the work. And in the short range, it does no harm. Don't feel bad about falling asleep in this prayer practice. Realize that's an operational hazard of this gently receptive bandwidth that works in. But if you're consistently falling asleep in prayer, the usual second suspect is resistance. There's something that you don't want to face. There's something that you're and sometimes the way of working with that is to just, in a quiet period of transparency and disclosure before you do the prayer, just say, "Okay, I'm here, Lord, bring it on." And it's interesting how so many of these things that are uttered in simple prayer, you're not even knowing whether you believe them or not. If you're earnest, if you're sincere, they'll, show me. If there's something blocking, Lord, show me. Yeah, and then hang on. So any of the above is true, but don't worry about it, for heaven's sake, and don't feel embarrassed. The only place where it becomes any kind of problem is when you're in a group and you start snoring, which goes on all the time in centering prayer. And somebody will probably poke you. Don't worry. And don't be afraid of poking your neighbor. It's part of contemplative outreach consciousness. Okay, here's an interesting question, again running down the same bandwidth. Is there any relationship to the state of consciousness induced by an artificial substance such as peyote to the state of consciousness induced by contemplation? Well, maybe on a brain scan, but once again, I think that what we've got going on here is this tendency that we see all over our culture to equate meditation with altered states. And there's a wonderful, wonderful teaching, again, in Ken Wilber's great grab bag of tools for the contemplative journey, where he distinguishes between a stage and a state. A state is a place you go to. My place of bliss, my place of enlightenment, my place of oneness. A stage is a place you come from. It's an integrated being that can be replicated in you because you've integrated through your whole life, through your moral will, through your ethical behavior, through your practice, through your constrictions. And so the states may look alike between, ayahuasca, peyote, and meditation, but the stages are going to be completely different. Because as we approach centering prayer, we're approaching it not to have a blissful experience that's then going to open our eyes and teach us all about the ways of God. What part of acquisitiveness do you not understand? It's the gentle laying down of self, the humble work, the not asking for visions, the not asking for illuminations, not even caring if anybody notices that you exist. Because, hey, you do exist. And you exist already in a relational field of love which is so deep and boundless that it doesn't need to be affirmed. So to come to prayer in humility, in willingness to give, in a genuine wish that humankind and all sentient being be made better, in the genuine willingness to be given nothing, but to give, because it's the divine nature to give, and we have that in us. So to bring that is to bring a fundamental and different modality to the practice. And I've only seen a little bit of neuroscience, neuromeditation results, but I will be willing to bet that although some regions of the brain look the same, that you're going to see some different connectivity in some important different ways through the kind of intention you bring to it. So, bottom line for me, again and again, is forget your intoxication with states. We don't get enlightened by swooping up to some high state, trying to take all sorts of photos of it, and then remember it as life draws us down. We get enlightened by realizing that everything, every instant of divinity, every power of the fire of the divine heart is right here, right now. Nothing missing. When we simply have to put our teeth and our feet on the ground and walk into love. Okay? So, no trips. Where do good feelings come into centering prayer? What role do they play? Well, I could say glibly, no role, nothing. But I'm not going to dismiss that question quite so cavalierly, because there's a profound core in here that what happens is that we typically use the word feeling as a multi-spectrum thing that includes feeling, emotion, sensation, and they're all different. Good feelings have to do with the emotional, emotions have to do with my personal affective life. Feelings are deeper as you set them free from your personal reference point. And if you've noticed really deep and strong feelings, it's hard to define them one way. They're not just happy or just sad. As Rilke once said, that beauty is only the beginning of a terror we can just scarcely bear. So already, feeling, once we've just detangled that from emotion, begins to be, in some sense, a participation in the divine feeling life of God, which is deep, ambivalent, complex, and always just beyond what a human being can bear. And there are no longer good feelings, because all good is laced with terror and all awe is laced with comfort, and all sadness is laced with joy. So that's the feeling life. Sensation is something still deeper that's accessed in the body. And very often when you come into centering prayer and draw your attention deep into the heart through sensation, what you will be amazed to discover is that the heart's radiant field is characterized by pure intimacy, objectless intimacy, intimacy that's not dependent on somebody out there to be intimate with. And it's a sensation even deeper than a feeling. And I think that much of the hidden and interior life of centering prayer is lived at that deep junction between feelingness and sensation in the heart. I talk about that more in the book. And because of that, and because we've sat at the hem of that beautiful, deep, divine feeling life of God in the heart, what comes out of that is a deep equanimity. And equanimity is way different from happiness. I had an experience. I got to go to Rome last week. I got to go to the Vatican through a whole set of wonderful, wacky circumstances. And no, I did not sit on the Pope's lap and tell him what I wanted for Christmas. But one of the things that happened is I got for the first time to actually stand eyeball to eyeball with the Pietà. And the look on that, on the face of Mary is what we mean by this whole thing. It's indescribable. I mean, I'd seen photographs of it. But there is this mix of every feeling known to human being. There's sadness, there's grief, there's devastation, and at the same time there's infinite wisdom and repose. And that, yes, this too may be. And it's that kind of a deeply feeling life, which is the equanimity that the practice of centering prayer allows us to bring to life. We don't have to go through the tedious algebra of translating negative feelings into positive feelings so that we can move forward. We can drop below the whole thing and simply gathered and hunkered in that infinite tenderness and intimacy of divine feelingness. Live with whatever is. So I think that's how I would answer the where do good feelings come in centering prayer? Everywhere and nowhere. Let's see. Here's an interesting one, another very, very brilliant one. In working with trauma victims, these survivors often describe dissociative states where they are neither thinking subject or object, but connected to another place. Does this relate at all? Well, that's what Ken Wilber would call the post-trans fallacy, that not all things that look alike are alike. And yes, there is in victims of trauma and in post-traumatic distress syndrome, there is that tendency to dissociation. And I, in fact, am careful with people who come to centering prayer with an immediate history of trauma or a long history of trauma, or with people that have got schizophrenic tendencies, because the centering prayer method, more than other methods, allows this kind of gentle release of the concentrative effort, and it can flip you into that kind of dissociative tendency. So I want to watch with people who have a lot of trauma. I'll often sit with them and say, let's do centering prayer for 2 minutes together, holding hands if you want. so that something in you stays intact. And if I watch signs of people going back into that traumatic dissociative place, I'll suggest that they do embodied meditation and a more concentrative practice, just because that will force of the ego needs to hold things together. The ego is not our enemy. It's the scab on the wound of our living. And it really helps prevent, us taking in more pain and more overwhelm than we're capable of. So don't treat it like a bad guy. And the moving through it really needs to happen gently as this deeper sense of selfhood is strengthened in us. So honoring that and wanting to be very, very clear with it and not kind of, pussyfooting around it. Nevertheless, what we're talking about in the non-dual side of it is of a completely different order. And the dissociation, it isn't even dissociation. It's resociation, if you want to call it. That subject-object splits because it's rejoined together in a higher and coherent field of subjective perceptivity. So there very, very much is an intact selfhood there. We're not disintegrating. And this intact selfhood is just working at a far higher vibratory bandwidth. Very, very different. And it doesn't result in any of these spacey or numb tendencies. You come out of the time of meditation and you even work in this illumined state, you're still right there. You know who your neighbor is. You count the change if you're behind the bread counter. You do what needs to be done in the world with force. So it's not like you don't have any self. It hasn't demolished the self. It simply is the agency of the witnessing self, sealed and grounded at that lower level, that can suspend the shorthand of subject-object, which the egoic self needs in order to function. Okay? So this is a really, really important question and needs to be sort of on the radar screen of those of you that are working in healing therapies. I would say, and it may be wash out your mouth with soap, but I've always worried that people will sometimes push a hard line so hard that they don't see the reality that's in their place. If people are in distress from doing centering prayer, find a different way in for them. Don't keep pushing something that isn't working. The centering prayer will work and work brilliantly for all but a narrow swath of woundedness. But if you find yourself working in that swath, don't push your ideology. Move towards more concentrative and more embodied practice if you see any sign that a person is fragmenting. Okay? And keep practicing to know the difference. Let's see. The question of preparation for centering prayer said, and after contemplation, period of re-entry, doesn't take a long time. It's important to be conscious as you make the transition out of the prayer back into your life. Just say, I am here, I'm doing it. Now we've again kind of fallen into an automatic shorthand where people say, linger for 1 or 2 minutes longer afterwards on the cushion. And a lot of people do that, but it's beginning to become a ritual that in itself, and sometimes people fall right back into meditation. The idea is to make a conscious transition. And if you remember the first thing you do when you get up off your meditation cushion, and remember, for God's sake, to do it spaciously. Don't jerk away from your meditation mat to run to something. A conscious, spacious transition, it doesn't need to take a long period of time. You are not in psychological regression when you do centering prayer. That was a kind of cliche of the 80s. That was very, very popular when we were languaging this practice in therapeutic terms. But people that are doing the prayer rightly out of a genuine sense of service and responsibility and self-giving can flip back immediately, because love calls us to the things of this world. And you aren't in this sort of floating state where you're vulnerable, and I've gone to the door to the retreat house at Snowmass and found it locked and bolted because people are in the middle of this retreat, and the idea is that if you disturb them, they'll all melt. We have to get a little sharper on our hospitality, So this prayer brings strength, it brings graciousness. You are not weakening, you're not victimizing yourself to be part of it. And whenever there is the demand to move forward into action, you move forward without any damage to yourself. It's just that you want to make sure that you move consciously and spaciously. That way, the connection is deepened with your witnessing self, your deeper self. It's not just something you do and then you jerk back into your little self and don't even know where you went. Okay? So, and I think the last question is, where is it? It's so great. Can we really put new wine into old wineskins? I think I'm actually more interested in putting old wine into new wineskins. However you use the wine and wineskin metaphor, and it actually has some actual real important things in terms of if you know about wine and know what its chemical properties do to the leather that it used to be put in. It's a true idiom. But I would say that I think that we have in our Christian contemplative tradition a powerful, excellent, non-dual, sacred wine, which has flowed to us from the ages, has flowed to us specifically through the person of Jesus Christ, and is not exclusive, let alone superior in the family of world religions, but takes its place in the whole precious family of sacred religions, witnessing to a particular stream of love, intimacy, tenderness, compassion, and embodiment. I think that wine is good. I believe sincerely what G.K. Chesterton once said, Christianity isn't a failure, it just hasn't been tried yet. And that I so deeply respect and am grateful to the practice of centering prayer because it's really allowed a significant number of Christian practitioners to taste this infinite and good and eternal wine which has flowed through our lineage, and to begin to interiorize it in our lives. Each one of us is the wineskin. And whether we're old or new at the game, I think that we can bear forth this wine and bring it to the world in ways that really honor in our own generation its enduring and infinite worth.